April 2022, Russian tankers carrying 1.5 million barrels of crude oil vanished from radar. The vessels, part of a covert dark fleet, reappeared days later in foreign ports, their cargo unloaded and profits secured.
Despite a raft of sanctions, Russia has continued shipping and selling its crude oil to the world.
Shadow fleet, dark fleet, ghost fleet. Sinister synonyms for decrepit vessels with questionable ownership and inadequate accident insurance, which environmentalists say are carrying sanctioned Russian oil way too close for comfort in the Danish Straits.
This isn't piracy, it's a calculated operation. These dark fleets or shadow fleets are financing war efforts, defying global sanctions, and shifting the balance of power. But how did we get here, and why are these fleets nearly unstoppable? Let's find out. The term shadow fleet describes ships operating outside international laws to move oil and other goods from sanctioned countries like Iran, Russia, and Venezuela. These fleets first gained prominence during sanctions against Iran in the late 2000s. By turning off tracking systems and using forged documentation, these vessels transported oil worth billions. Iran relied on this covert network to evade sanctions imposed by the United States and the European Union over its nuclear program. The technique expanded during the Trump administration, which intensified efforts to halt Iranian oil exports. President Donald Trump withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, in 2018, reimposing sanctions. Iran responded by expanding its shadow fleet, utilizing aging ships flagged under countries with limited oversight, like Panama and Liberia. By 2019, Iran was moving an estimated 1.5 million barrels of oil daily, with a significant portion flowing undetected through the shadow fleet. This network allowed Iran to sustain its economy despite crippling sanctions. Fast forward to 2022, and Russia adopted similar tactics after its invasion of Ukraine triggered global sanctions. When European Union restrictions on Russian crude exports came into force in December 2022, Moscow redirected its oil flows, relying heavily on shadow fleets. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, requires ships to broadcast their location via an automatic identification system, AIS. But shadow fleet vessels often switch off their AIS transponders to go dark. Using this strategy, they disappear from monitoring systems for days or even weeks. This evasion is paired with ship-to-ship transfers, another hallmark of the dark fleet. Russian crude is frequently moved to larger tankers near neutral waters, disguising its origin before reaching buyers in Asia, particularly India and China. As of 2024, Russia is estimated to be using over 600 vessels for shadow operations, according to reports by Lloyd's List. This number represents a dramatic increase compared to the 200 ship estimate 2 years earlier. Russian shadow fleet vessels operate worldwide. However, in the first half of 2024, shadow tankers exported almost 42% of total Russian seaborne oil from Baltic and Black Sea ports. The KSE Institute estimates that in April 2024, Russia's shadow fleets transported approximately 92.4 million barrels, accounting for about 82% of all its exports passing through the Baltic Sea.
It is extremely serious and it is extremely risky. These oil tankers are carrying over 100,000 tons of crude oil that is toxic to humans and to the environment, and will put waste to our coastlines for decades.
Shadow fleet operations are not just about sanctions evasion, they're also a geopolitical tool. For nations like Iran and Russia, these fleets symbolize defiance against Western dominance in global trade and finance. The Russia-Ukraine war has placed the shadow fleet in the spotlight like never before. Following Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the European Union, G7 nations, and the United States imposed sweeping sanctions on Russian energy exports. The aim was clear: to cripple Moscow's primary revenue source, oil. But Russia's dark fleet ensured its oil flowed undeterred, undermining the sanctions regime. Moscow leveraged the shadow fleet to reroute crude oil from Europe to Asia, where demand remained high despite international pressure. Reports from maritime analysts in 2023 indicated that approximately 70% of Russia's crude exports bypassed formal monitoring systems, using techniques like falsified documentation and obscure offshore registries. For example, vessels would load Russian crude at Novorossiysk, a major port on the Black Sea, and transfer it at sea to tankers with no declared destination. This crude often found its way to refineries in India and China under different flags of origin. In the first half of 2023 alone, Russian energy exports earned $210 billion, according to data from the International Energy Agency, IEA. Much of this revenue came through shadow fleet operations. Despite oil price caps imposed by G7 nations, Russian crude sold at discounted rates still undercut global competitors, drawing eager buyers and sustaining the Kremlin's war chest. By masking its oil origin, Russia kept its lifeline open, financing its military and securing its economic stability during the conflict. However, the role of the shadow fleet in the war goes beyond economics. Experts warn that Russia's fleet operations also have strategic implications. Tankers operating under false identities can serve dual purposes, including intelligence gathering or covertly supplying military fuel. The shadow fleet has also been linked to geopolitical partnerships. As sanctions forced Russia to find alternative routes, it deepened its ties with nations like Iran, which has decades of experience evading sanctions through its dark fleet operations. In 2023, joint shadow fleet maneuvers between Russia and Iran began to raise international concerns. Intelligence reports from Western agencies suggested coordinated shipping routes between the two nations, enabling efficient movement of crude oil, refined products, and even weapons. For both nations, the shadow fleet serves as a symbol of resilience and defiance, as well as a tool to fund their broader geopolitical agendas. Meanwhile, Western governments, led by the United States, intensified their efforts to clamp down on these clandestine operations. Maritime monitoring firms like Lloyd's List and Vortexa reported an increase in ship seizures, detentions, and fines in 2024. However, the shadow fleet's ability to adapt by switching registries, altering names, or disabling tracking systems has made enforcement a game of cat and mouse. In the face of the shadow fleet's growing influence, the United States launched a series of aggressive measures to counteract the operations of Russia and Iran. Under former President Donald Trump's administration, a series of sanctions and naval monitoring strategies were rolled out, targeting the backbone of these shadow operations, the vessels themselves. In 2019, Trump's administration implemented sweeping sanctions designed to cut off Iran's oil revenue entirely, referring to it as the regime's economic lifeline. These measures forced Iran to expand its shadow fleet, a move that drew global attention to the scale and adaptability of these networks. By the time sanctions ramped up against Russia in 2022, Washington had already developed frameworks to track illicit shipping operations. However, both nations had grown more adept at evading oversight. Reports in 2023 indicated that sanctions compliance became an almost impossible task, with shadow fleet operators using advanced masking technologies and altering shipping routes to confound maritime regulators. Under Trump's renewed public focus in 2024, he outlined policies aimed at eliminating shadow fleets. His proposed initiatives included hefty penalties for nations or companies that cooperated with these fleets, combined with enhanced satellite surveillance systems to track and intercept tankers suspected of illicit activities. Trump also pushed for expanded international coalitions, urging the European Union and G7 members to tighten enforcement and share intelligence on suspicious fleet movements. These measures extended beyond economics and into geopolitics. Trump's policies sought to choke off Russia and Iran's ability to sustain their global influence during major conflicts, including the ongoing war in Ukraine. By targeting shadow fleets, his administration aimed to weaken Russia's financial capacity to sustain its military operations. The shadow fleets became a focal point for larger geopolitical dynamics, highlighting how maritime trade routes could dictate the outcomes of broader conflicts. Yet the shadow fleet's resilience showcased their ability to evade even the most sophisticated strategies. In response to US crackdowns, ship operators frequently switched registries to flags of convenience, operating under jurisdictions with minimal oversight. In 2024, a report by Lloyd's List revealed that nearly 80% of shadow fleet tankers had ties to jurisdictions known for weak maritime law enforcement, such as Panama or Liberia. As the battle between enforcement agencies and the shadow fleets intensifies, the stakes remain high. For nations like Russia and Iran, the fleets are more than vessels. They're tools of economic survival and defiance. For the United States, they represent a growing challenge in the fight to uphold sanctions and international laws.